There's an awful lot to get through, isn't there? We're joined in the studio now by political commentator Andy Williams. Good to see you this morning, Andy.
Morning.
Should we start with Diane Abbott? Because this has thrown the Labour Party campaign into chaos, hasn't it? This row is intensifying.
Well, I don't know about that. I think, actually, the Labour Party campaign so far has been very disciplined. This was probably the first day where there'd been a bit of a misstep and it doesn't look great. In the scheme of things, I'm not sure this is something that people will remember too much. But what I would say is that after the disaster of the Corbyn years, Labour need a zero-tolerance policy on candidates who say or do things that don't accord to Labour Party values. And unfortunately, Diane Abbott wrote an article, which it was an unforced error on her part. She proactively wrote an article where she made comments that were not acceptable. And so...
Yes, but she's been allowed back into the party.
Yes.
So why allow her back into the party if you won't let her stand?
Well, there's a difference between being a member of the Labour Party and
being a PPC.
being a representative of the Labour Party. And I do think you have to be held to a higher standard. I think what's kind of regrettable and a bit disappointing is that this has been allowed to drag on, because this happened a year ago, right? So the Labour Party could have sorted this out earlier, but Keir Starmer says no decision has been taken, by the way, so I think this story still has a bit of a way to go. But what I think is more interesting is the other candidates who the Labour Party have ditched in the last 24 hours, other hard-left candidates who I just think have no business representing a mainstream Labour Party. Right,
but so you're OK, fair enough, but does that make this a purge?
Well, I wouldn't have said that. I think that actually... at the end of the day, it's up to the Labour National Executive Committee who represents the Labour Party. And if Labour are going to be in government and potentially have a significant majority, it's important that MPs are on board with what Labour are trying to achieve. So if you're going round as Fazia Hashim, for example, who's been banned from standing in East London, if you're going round liking tweets about, the Israel war that don't accord with Labour's policy, then you shouldn't be standing.
What about Lloyd Russell Moyle?
Well, he's obviously been MP in Brighton for quite some time. There are allegations about his behaviour that I think probably won't go into, but there are clearly good reasons why these people aren't being allowed to stand.
But it does show, doesn't it, that there is an issue. There is still this Gaza issue at the heart of the Labour Party. It's something they're going to have to tackle before the next general election.
Yeah, and obviously it's incredibly divisive. There's no way that you're going to get the entire parliamentary Labour Party onto the same page about this, and I think it will figure in certain seats in the general election campaign. George Galloway is standing again in Rochdale against Paul Waugh, the political journalist for Labour. You have other seats, I think, particularly around sort of Birmingham and parts of London as well, where it's going to be a big issue.
What are we to make of the Tories' tactics at the moment? We're going to be talking to the Chancellor later on this morning. But, it's all over the Express. Let me just grab this. It's all over the Express this morning. And they're calling it Hunt's win because Labour... He's gone on about VAT rising under Labour, so Labour's come out and said...
just not true.
No, it won't. But it's being pitched as they've been forced into this admission.
It's just not true. The Labour Party and Rachel Reeves have said, we're not going to raise income tax, we're not going to raise corporation tax, we won't be raising national insurance or VAT. And they've said that all along. That's been really clear. I think.
Well, they haven't been, but to be fair, they haven't been that clear about VAT, which is why.
Well, no, but they have now clarified that. I don't think they've been forced into anything, and I don't think Rachel Reeves is ditching policies that would potentially raise billions of pounds on a whim. In terms of the tactics, look, it's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, because they're 20 points behind in the polls and they're pretty desperate. I think some of the tactics, all of this stuff about Keir Starmer being sleepy and not getting out of bed early in the morning, it's just rubbish. It's just nonsense, and I think it looks desperate. I think people can feel and smell that desperation from Rishi Sunak, actually, and I think next week in the first debate, which I believe is taking place next Tuesday night for ITV, that'll be a really interesting moment, because Sunak has to do something significant to turn the tide, and I can't see any other scenario apart from the debates where he has the opportunity to do that.
Do you think it's right that first debate next week is just Labour and the Conservatives?
Yeah,
I think there should be other parties as well.
They're the only two people who can feasibly be Prime Minister. Ultimately, if you're voting reform, that's a vote for a Labour government. If you're voting Lib Dem, that's a tactical vote for one or the other, depending on which constituency you live in. So I think it's important that we see the two people who could be the next Prime Minister. And the other thing is that those leaders' debates that we've had in the past, where you've had 7 or 8 people on one stage, it just doesn't work.
Look, admittedly, I think it all gets lost a little bit when there's so many people involved. The problem is, with the Prime Ministerial debate, in that sense, is that it becomes actually quite presidential, doesn't it? Because you're voting for a person rather than a party's policies, or indeed an individual PPC, a prospective parliamentary candidate in your area. So it turns the tide of it all a little bit.
It does. Obviously, our politics has become more presidential. I think Rishi Sunak's very clearly running a very presidential campaign, which I find quite surprising, given that he's not the best campaigner in the world. Obviously, the Chancellor's out today. We haven't seen much of David Cameron. I know he was out, was it yesterday or the day before? But generally, it's all eyes on Rishi. And, he is trying to make it about him, so he'll live or die by that.
We are almost out of time, but on that note, it is really interesting to me how Rishi Sunak is kind of playing himself at the moment as the underdog. He's been talking about the Labour Party, saying they're taking the public for granted, they're just going to waltz into number 10 without a plan. He is positioning himself as not being the man who's going to get into number 10 at the moment.
He is, and obviously that's what the polls say. I think what's also interesting is the roles have reversed in terms of what you'd expect. The Tories are running around spending money like it's going out of fashion. National service here, defence spending there, spending commitments. Labour are making none.
OK.
Right.
Andy Williams, good to see you this morning.
Apart from the Express talking about this £38.5 billion black hole that Keir Starmer's got in his plans.
Depends on who you ask. I don't think that's reality.
Well, they're both accusing each other of huge black holes.
As always.
In their pledges. Thanks very much, Andy. Good to see you.
See you later on.
Thanks.